As we are coming on the air, court is about to be in session right now live with the suspect in Sunday's Wisconsin car attack. He's being charged with 5 counts of intentional homicide. We know that now from the documents that are out after that horrific Christmas parade attack. The Wisconsin community there tonight stopping and grieving and remembering the people they lost. We're also live down in Georgia where court is no longer in session because now it's all up to the jury to decide what's going to happen to the 3 men accused of murdering Ahmaud Arbery. And wait till you hear the prosecutor's last word to those jurors. And then just in the last few hours, a new update coming into us on the boyfriend of Gabby Petito. What Brian Laundrie's family attorney is now saying for the first time about how he died. And if the price of meat heading into Thanksgiving is too high, why not just grow it yourself? Yeah, grow it. Our original tonight looks at a company, their cultivated meat, and why it could help the environment and your checking account. That's in the original. Plus, have you heard about Matthew McConaughey, maybe future Governor McConaughey down in Texas? He's really thinking about it, and apparently a lot of people want him to. So now the Oscar-winning superstar has 2 weeks to decide if that's all right with him. Do you get it? That's a line. That's a famous line from his movie. We're going to have a lot more on that in just a second. Hey, I'm Hallie, and as we speak, the man accused of killing 5 people at a holiday parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, is in court. Court has just gone into session. You are actually taking a look live now. We know that Darrell Brooks, the suspect, is appearing in person. This is going down as we speak. He is facing multiple charges of intentional homicide for the attack that left 5 people dead. We're also now learning that 62 people were hurt in this attack. That's about a dozen more than we initially knew. And tonight, people in Waukesha are remembering those victims who range in age from 52 to 81. You see the 5 people killed on screen. And then there's this, some exclusive video from a doorbell cam that seems to be Brooks right before he was arrested. He's apparently knocking on the door of somebody's house just about a half-mile away from the scene. He claimed he was experiencing homelessness and asked the man who answered the door to call him an Uber. So as we're watching what's happening in court, we've got a note for you here that Brooks has a real criminal history. You see some of it on screen. Prosecutors in Milwaukee have already said he shouldn't have even been out of prison in the first place. I want to go now to that hearing in Waukesha. Maura Barrett is outside the courthouse. And Maura, we've been getting that live look from inside the court, too. We now know he's definitely getting charged with homicide. What else are we going to find out as this unfolds?
Well, the second question we're looking for an answer to, the first one, obviously, is how many counts of homicide he was going to receive. And now we see that there are 5 counts of that intentional homicide. The second question, though, surrounds bail, how high it'll be set or whether it'll be set at all. Remember, Brooks has a very extensive criminal background, like you just talked about. And there's also this controversy around the quote, very low bail that the Milwaukee DA had let him off on, about $1,000 on an earlier charge just this month. And so there's a question about whether he should be out in public at all right now. If there's no bail set, Brooks will continue to be held in custody.
And again, I want to just point out to folks, that's what you're seeing on the left side of your screen right now. It appears to be Brooks in that green vest sitting, again, appearing in person. We thought maybe this would be a virtual appearance. Apparently it is now in person. And the judge is reading the counts as we speak now. Maura, I've also got to ask about that exclusive video that we've seen showing Brooks in the moments before his arrest, because apparently the guy who answered the door said he didn't even know what had happened in Waukesha, right?
Right. And, you know, I've been thinking a lot about this video today, and I think that guy specifically kind of exemplifies the type of person that we've met time and time again here during our time in Waukesha and how incredibly kind they are. He had no idea what was going on. He had been on a hunting trip. He was watching a football game when the incident at the parade happened. But the man, Brooks, we see on that video, showed up on his doorstep, said he was homeless, needed an Uber ride. The homeowner brought him inside, let him use his phone, made him a sandwich before he saw that police were outside of the building. Wow. And he saw that it was kind of getting sketchy. And so he asked Brooks to leave. And that's when we see the rest of that video play out, in which Brooks is brought in for questioning with police there.
More in this conversation with you and I here, we're talking a lot about Brooks, right? Who is the suspect in this? It is so important in these stories to remember that there were lives lost. There are people who are families who do not get to spend Thanksgiving with the people that they love the most. We hear that 4 of those victims now, as we learn more about them, were part of this group called the Dancing Grannies, right?
They were, and they were exactly what that group title sounds like. They were elderly women that were in a larger group that performed dancing 20 times a year or so. They had glittery pom-poms, and they simply loved, or told, making people of all ages smile. And that was their intention at the parade. Their group put out a statement earlier yesterday saying that they were killed doing what they love, putting smiles on people's faces of all ages. And like you said, this parade was something that was frequented by people of all ages, families, children. There are 3 sets of siblings in the hospital right now, Hallie, parents who have no idea how their kids will be going into this holiday season. 62 total injured going into this Thanksgiving week because of this incident at this parade that started out as this joyous celebration, kicking off the holiday season, and ended in just such tragedy.
Maura Barrett, we're going to keep an eye on what's happening inside that courtroom so folks know. Our viewers are going to update you as we hear more. But Maura, thank you so much for keeping an eye on that there in Waukesha. Appreciate it. Right now, we're heading down to a different courtroom. The jury on hour 6 of their deliberations in the murder trial of the men who killed Ahmaud Arbery, a case where, you know, race has been a key part of the prosecution's argument in front of this almost all-white jury, with William Roddy Bryan, Greg McMichael, and his son Travis McMichael each facing 9 counts, including felony murder. And the prosecutor, in her final rebuttal today, trying to make the case that these defendants cannot and should not be claiming self-defense. Watch.
They started it. They do not get to claim self-defense. And then, of course, provocation. You can't force someone to defend themselves against you, so you get to claim self-defense. This isn't the Wild West. No. So there's 3 instances where the defendants don't get to claim self-defense, and they committed all of them.
And then just within the last couple hours, one of the defense attorneys showed up in front of reporters and sounded extremely confident when asked about a potential appeal, depending on the verdict.
An appeal? We're going to win. I don't know what y'all are talking about. Roddy's walking out of that courthouse today.
Obviously, Roddy Bryan has not yet walked out of that courthouse. I want to bring in now from Brunswick, Georgia, Cal Perry. Cal, that is a lot of confidence from Bryan's attorney there. Is it justified?
Look, possibly in his case. Yesterday we saw the defense sort of take a different tactic, which was they really divided up the defendants and they all went their own way. And in that case, the third defendant, Roddy Bryan, he was in the pickup truck that was behind the pickup truck that you saw driven by the McMichaels, by Greg McMichael and Travis McMichael, who was the gunman. And his attorney, whom you saw there, Kevin Goff, said, look, my client was just filming. He didn't have a gun. In fact, if he hadn't filmed this, we wouldn't be here today. That is quite obviously a spin on sort of the entire thing, but that is his spin. And it does sort of raise the issue that each of these defendants have 9 counts on them, and it is up to the jury to decide a level of guilt. So they could decide guilty for 2 of the defendants and some of the counts on the third defendant. It really is up to them. And this attorney, Kevin Goff, who's been making a name for himself by saying at times some outlandish things and outrageous things, has had this confidence, and it has kind of been his strategy. He's also been, it seems to me, the person designated to try for a mistrial every day. I mean, legitimately every day he's been trying for a mistrial, and he's been pointing to what's happening outside the courtroom, which is you do have some marches and you do have some sort of demonstrations, but they are very small. So that is one of the things that he is also trying to do, Hal.
I can't help but think, listen, it's a holiday week, Cal, right? You've got the jury deliberating, but Thanksgiving is coming up Thursday. I assume that they're not going to be in the room on the holiday, right? If they haven't gotten a verdict by then?
They're not going to be in the room on Thursday.
Okay.
Right. So if they're not to a verdict by Thursday, they're off for Thursday, but it's definitely going to be an indicator, right? I mean, if we're here tomorrow and there is not a verdict, then there's a whole lot of reporters having turkey in southern Georgia. That's clear. I mean, it's just going to be a factor. So if we don't have a verdict by sort of afternoon tomorrow, it's going to be looking like a longer haul.
The prosecution has been really clear here, Cal, that this is a case about race. You look at the makeup of the jury, 11 white jurors, 1 black juror. That got a lot of attention when jury selection was happening. One of the other defense attorneys yesterday, as you know, and as we talked about on this show, came under fire for describing Ahmaud Arbery's toenails as, you know, long and dirty, which was very upsetting to the Arbery family. No matter what the verdict is, this is going to have an impact on the national conversation over race whenever that verdict comes.
Absolutely. And it's all the more, I think we should remind our viewers that Arbery's mother sits in this courtroom and sees the photos of her dead son all the time. It's something we obscure for our viewers because they're very violent photos, but this is what she's going through every day. The issue of race, it's been fascinating in this trial because in so many ways the prosecution has kind of stayed away from it. They didn't bring up the fact that there was a slur used by the gunman, Travis McMichael, after he shot Ahmaud Arbery. They didn't bring up the fact that on the license plate on one of those pickup trucks driven by the McMichaels, there was the quote-unquote Georgia battle flag, which is a half Confederate flag. The prosecution's been staying away from it, and why it's interesting is because the defense keeps walking into it, right? We talked about this attorney who continues to bring up race in this trial. It's almost like the prosecution decided they didn't want to bring it up. They'd let the defense do it. In the eyes of the jury, we'll see if that works.
Cal Perry live for us there in Brunswick, Georgia. Cal, thank you for being live with us tonight. I appreciate it. Listen, I know we've been covering a lot of trial headlines, but there's another big one that we've got to tell you about. A jury returning a partial verdict today on a civil trial against the organizers of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. You remember that one? Back in 2017? These are some pictures from it. Heather Heyer was killed when a white supremacist rammed his car into a handful of counter-protests. So the deal now is that the 9 people who say that they were hurt sued the folks behind the rally. And the whole thing, this whole trial has been really emotional. Several of the plaintiffs cried on the stand while they were reliving this car attack and what happened the night before, which is what you're looking at now, when neo-Nazis carrying torches marched through the streets, shouting racist slogans. Pete Williams is here now to get into this verdict. And Pete, listen, this is complicated a little bit for a couple of reasons. One, to be clear, this is civil. This is a civil case. This was not a criminal trial. This was not a criminal case.
Right.
So let's start with this verdict here, because the jury awarded more than $25 million in damages to victims, but they were deadlocked on a couple of the charges. And you say that they're really the crucial charges here.
Well, this was the center of the case, which was under the federal Ku Klux Klan law that allows people to sue for violation of civil rights. The jury couldn't reach agreement on either of the 2 federal counts, but they did say that the people who were sued here violated a Virginia state conspiracy law. And from there on, they went to assess the damages against the defendants for various things. A total of $25 million. About half of that is the driver, a little over half of that is the driver, Fields, who killed the counter-protester. The rest is the other defendants, 12 individuals and 5 groups. That's a total of $11 million right there. My guess is that it was a compromise. The jury sent a note early on in the deliberations saying to the judge, what if we can't agree on the 3 conspiracy counts? And the judge said, keep trying. So they didn't agree. They couldn't agree on the 2 federal counts, that they did agree on the Virginia state count. So perhaps that was a compromise.
Here's what one of the attorneys for the people who sued had to say right after this came down just today. Watch.
This jury did find a conspiracy to commit violence and racially motivated violence as to each and every defendant. So we think that is a resounding verdict today and, frankly, a good sign for the future on the remaining counts.
So framing it as a victory here for the plaintiffs, is that fair? Is that valid?
Well, sure. I mean, one of the goals was to say, if you do this, you can get sued. Well, check.
That happened.
Another is to try to get big damage awards against these defendants to basically bankrupt them and make them pay a price. Check. On the federal count, to make it translatable, this pattern to any court in the country, well, obviously that's not a win for them, but they say they'll refile on those 2 federal counts.
That was
they could seek another trial on them. Whether they will or not, I don't know, but they could.
Well, you're answering the other question I had, which was, is this it? Is this the end of the road? And it sounds like it's not. You mentioned the idea of trying to, the potential for some of these defendants to be bankrupted here. I think one of them is spending life in prison, right, for Heather Heyer.
Well, Fields certainly did, because he was already convicted in a criminal case. But for the others, the organizations and the individuals, I mean, there's no way they're going to be able to come up with $11 million. So it's a huge financial hit to them. And I think that's one of the things that the plaintiffs were going for here.
Pete Williams, thank you very much for being with us. Good to see you in person in the newsroom. Thanks. Thanksgiving is just a couple days away, as you know, and 48 million people are expected to get in their cars and hit the road. But we know, listen, I don't have to tell you, if you drive to work, as most of us do, you probably know you're paying more for what you put in your gas tank. Let's just take a quick look at how those prices are, where they are all around the country right now, including, for example, the national average today, $3.40. That's up more than $1 since last year. If you live in California, I don't envy you. Average price today, $4.70. So President Biden is trying to do something about it. In this move that happened just today, kind of a surprise to some folks, he's announced he's going to release 50 million barrels of oil from this thing called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It's a stockpile. The U.S. stores all this oil underground in Texas and Louisiana. And the point of what the president's trying to do is to try to get those soaring oil and gas prices lower. Sounds good, right? Here's the catch. It's not like you're going to see it tomorrow when you go to fill your tank. It's going to take weeks, if not longer. Here's what the president said.
Today, we're launching a major effort to moderate the price of oil, an effort that will span the globe in its reach and ultimately reach your corner gas station, God willing. It will take time, but before long, you should see the price of gas drop where you fill up your tank.
I want to bring in now from the White House, Mike Memoli. Mem, thanks for being with us tonight. And listen, here's the deal, right? Presidents have tapped into this petroleum reserve before for emergencies. Gulf War, 91, Hurricane Katrina, 2005. There has been, it seems, some criticism that this may not be a true emergency, but in fact it is a political emergency for President Biden. But the White House is trying to frame it as like, no, hey, this is something that we've got to do, right?
Yeah, you can really get a sense of the messaging challenge at the White House as they look at the president and his numbers on the economy specifically right now. Because in the same speech where the president says, look, gas prices have been this high before, we've seen it in the past, he's also arguing that this is an emergency situation that justifies the kind of action that you lay out has only happened a few times before. What the White House ultimately says this comes down to is the pandemic, that the economy has come roaring back, at least in their view, in a way that was faster than expected from the peak of the shutdowns, lockdowns around the pandemic. And as more people are now consuming gas, the supply has not caught up to where that demand is. And so they've been really pressing energy producers, the oil and gas companies here in the U.S., but also OPEC nations, which in their view have not moved fast enough to put the supply out there. And that's why they're saying they're taking this extraordinary step, the biggest release from the U.S. Strategic Reserve ever, because as the president said, I was elected for people just like the middle class who are suffering because of these high prices.
Talk about the timing here, because we are, T-minus 48 hours from Thanksgiving. Today and tomorrow are like the busiest travel days of this holiday week. Yeah. But it's not like this is a magic wand and tomorrow I'm going to go and it's going to be cheaper to fill up my tank.
What the Energy Department itself says is that the quickest you tend to see an impact in terms of prices and actually getting the barrels out of the sites along the Gulf Coast where they keep this reserve is 13 days. But what was fascinating to hear from the White House today, you saw it in the press release and you heard even the president hint at it himself, is just the idea that they might do this, which had been reported about in some quarters over the past few weeks, was enough to sort of get the price already dropping worldwide. So they're already claiming credit for something that the president just did today. We noticed that the price of crude oil actually went up today, but what the White House is expecting, and you heard it from the Secretary of Energy as well, Jennifer Granholm, is that ultimately we're going to turn the corner in 2022 and see these prices come way down.
What's something that surprised you in the course of reporting this out today, Mike, that you haven't said on the air yet?
What's interesting, I think, is what we aren't talking enough about, which is there's the cooperation from China in all of this. We've talked so much about the very complicated relationship that we have. We don't think of them as an ally, but they were willing to work with the U.S. on this issue, release some of their own energy reserves. It's sort of a product of that relationship between President Biden and President Xi, and a recognition that they have some domestic political concerns as well that the White House was able to acknowledge and tap into in this case.
Great point. Mike Memoli, thanks for being with us, friend. Appreciate it. We got some breaking news now, also in Washington. This coming in from the January 6th Select Committee investigating the Capitol riot. They've just issued more subpoenas, this time to far-right extremist groups. You might have heard of them. The Proud Boys, that's one of them. The Oath Keepers, that's another. Plus the heads, the chairman, the presidents, whatever you want to call them, of both of those groups. And the subpoenas against those militia groups are just the latest from this committee to try to investigate what happened on January 6th, a signal really that they are expanding the breadth of their investigation and looking to include extremism in that review as well. We got a pretty big development to tell you about in another case that it seems like everybody was talking about just a couple of months ago. The disappearance and then the death of Gabby Petito and her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie, who was a person of interest in Petito's death. You might remember that her remains were found in September. She died. It was ruled as homicide by strangulation. Well, tonight, the Laundrie family attorney is saying an autopsy shows Brian Laundrie died by suicide when he shot himself in the head. Kathy Park has been following this story for us. And Kathy, people talked so much about this. I mean, this was all over the headlines for weeks, right? Earlier, end of summer, beginning of fall. They were a couple. They'd been traveling together. Laundrie came back to Florida without Gabby Petito and then went missing about 2 weeks later, found last month after this manhunt. An initial autopsy was done last month. this isn't the conclusion we heard then, right? Then it was that no manner or cause of death was determined. What changed?
Yeah, exactly, Hallie. So October 20th is when Brian Laundrie's remains were discovered, and the day after was when they actually identified his remains by using his dental records. So according to the Laundrie family attorney, Steve Bertolino, he said that the autopsy came back inconclusive, and therefore they enlisted the help of a anthropologist, a forensic anthropologist, to analyze the remains. So that is why there is this kind of lag time, and then we have this update today. So the medical examiner today saying that this was death by suicide and he died because of a gunshot wound. So it appears we're waiting for the information from the anthropologist to have more answers, more details about his death.
Have we heard anything from Laundrie's family about this yet?
No, you know what? They have been leaning on Steve Bertolino, the attorney, the entire time. As you know, cameras were pretty much camped out in front of that home in Florida, waiting for them to respond to this. But they have been pretty quiet. It's pretty silent throughout all of this, especially with them in the spotlight. And they've been getting a lot of scrutiny for not speaking up.
Kathy Park with that reporting for us here tonight. Kathy, thank you for being with us. An update now to a pretty wild story that we brought you yesterday. Remember those smash and grabs we talked about in the Bay Area? Well, guess what? They are spreading. Police are stepping up, and now even the governor is getting involved. We'll tell you how. Right now in California, shoppers and store owners are dealing with real headaches that have nothing to do with supply shortages. Instead, it's all about those smash and grab robberies that we told you about. They keep happening. They happened again overnight out in LA, where police are adding more patrols after the Grove Mall got hit. It's because of what happened here. I want to show you some of the video. Suspects used an e-bike. So they rode an e-bike, used a sledgehammer to break the glass at a Nordstrom's, and then stole a bunch of stuff from inside. 3 people have now been arrested. And this has gotten so serious that it's getting the attention of this guy, the governor, Gavin Newsom. He's adding more security to some of these shopping areas. He's adding highway patrol, too. And then in San Francisco, the district attorney there is set to announce charges from a theft that happened Friday. Steve Patterson has been all over this story for us. Steve, this is the 4th day in a row. This is the 4th day in a row that this is going on, right? All these spots that we see have been hit in very dramatic fashion. Some of it captured, as you know, on security camera. What happened to the patrols that should have been in place 3 nights ago? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, Hallie, this is the United States, right? There's a real hesitancy to do anything that could be seen as restricting freedoms or access, especially to shopping in the holiday season. People here barely respected wearing a mask to protect their own families for $20 worth of groceries. So no one really wants to have a security checkpoint between a shopper and a $500 Fendi bag. But what several law enforcement officers have been telling me, experts, I should say, is that there's more of a problem of this on the back end. A few years ago, California enacted laws that raised the threshold of felony theft from $450 to nearly $1,000. Experts say that makes it harder to prosecute. It makes it harder for police to follow up, and it's not as attractive for merchants to report these thefts in the first place. So I spoke to the former president of the District Attorneys Association here about what this means for the current crime wave. Here's what he said. Listen to this.
It's incredibly frustrating.
Love Steve Patterson.
What we
he gets
know
it.
is it's a relatively small number of people who commit these types of crimes over and over again. And they have learned that because of the changes in the law in the state of California, there is no consequence for their actions.
So there, of course, are modifications and modifiers for that law that include organized crime as far as theft, but it's very hard to prove organized crime theft. And especially with the nature of these crimes being kind of flash mobs, really hard to do, Hallie.
So the other question here is these videos that have gone viral, right? And I wonder if that helps or hurts. And by that, I mean, how much is that maybe helping police identify some of the suspects, or how much is it like playing into a trend, right, that people see, and then there's copycatting?
Well, there wouldn't be a trend if it wasn't for the viral nature of the crimes on social media. This is really is the fuel to the fire. It's pretty much all in the win column, unfortunately, for the thieves. Pearson, the former president of that association, says it's essentially like a flash mob. The info goes out on social. It tells you where to be and what time. Then they have these huge groups of people, as you mentioned in that intro, force their way in, take whatever they can, and they get away all within about a minute. These are crimes also of a digital age. So the criminals, the crooks, the thieves, they know they're going to be on camera. They cover their faces. In all of the cases we've seen, the license plates have been covered. They know how the penalties are reduced right now. So it's hard for police to track them. And at this point, after it's been done successfully time after time, the reward, kind of far outweighs the risk at this point, Hallie.
Before all this happened, I remember Walgreens said they were going to close some stores up near San Francisco because shoplifting had gotten so bad. Do you think that more stores might head in the direction of that, given what we're seeing that you're covering now?
I mean, experts say a version of that is already happening with what we talked about before, which is more security, reduced hours, less access to stores, all of that leading, unfortunately, to reduced sales. It's not clear, though, if that will actually lead to some of these more high-end stores completely shutting down, because, as you know, this is such a crucial time for them. They have a few of these big-ticket items that they need to move during the holidays, and if they don't, that's really bad. But, again, if this continues, if we have another one tonight, I mean, who knows what will happen, Hallie.
Steve, it's come to my attention that my microphone was accidentally open when that soundbite played, and I was complimenting you and saying how much we love you on this show. And so I just want to be really transparent with our audience. We do love you. You crush it every day. Thank you for being on. Appreciate it.
I love being on. Let me say that when my mic is open, too. Thanks.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Steve. Turning now to some other news now, including some news from overseas. A very scary and a very sad scene in Bulgaria after a bus crash killed dozens of North Macedonian tourists, including kids. What officials there say happened right before this crash. And the voting rights fight in this country is not over by a long shot. Heidi Presbala takes us to Michigan in tonight's backstory, where one law could really affect people's access to the ballot box. Coming up, our Kate Snow has an exclusive that you will see here with an attorney who's made it her mission to hold Facebook, or Meta, liable for what she says is sex trafficking of minors on the site. We're going to get to that in a bit. But first, we want to get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a Kansas City, Missouri man has been ordered released from prison after 43 years. The judge says Kevin Strickland was wrongfully convicted for 3 murders back in 1979. Strickland has said he was home watching TV at the time the killings happened. Number 2, at least 45 people, including 12 kids, were killed after a bus crashed and caught fire in western Bulgaria. Most of the people on board were tourists coming back from a trip to Istanbul. We still don't know why that bus crashed. Police are trying to figure it out now. Number 3, want to know why NASA is planning to crash one of its spacecrafts into an asteroid? They say it's a test to protect the Earth from something crashing into us at some point in the future. It is the anti-Armageddon. It all happens early tomorrow morning. That's when liftoff is. At some point in the next year, it'll try to knock an asteroid off course. Listen, we're going to tell you if that happens. You'll see it here first. Number 4, a federal jury has ruled CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart recklessly distributed huge amounts of pain pills in 2 counties in Ohio. Those counties blame the pharmacies for not stopping the flow of pills that led to hundreds of overdose deaths. The trial judge still has to rule on how much they'll pay in damages. And number 5, a very rare manuscript that belonged to this guy, Albert Einstein, just raked in some major money at an auction in Paris. If you're a math geek, this piece of paper might make sense to you. A lot of calculations that led to Einstein's theory of relativity. And guess how much it sold for? $13 million. It was expected to get about $3.5 million. Obviously, somebody really wanted their hands on that. Time now to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. And tonight, we're talking about what's happening with voting rights in Michigan, where Republicans are trying to force through tougher voting laws. And they don't even need the Democratic governor's signature or approval. Why not? Well, they're doing it with a petition that requires signatures from fewer than 4% of registered voters in the state. It's called Secure Michigan Vote. And this petition would mean real changes to the voter ID requirement. They also want to ban the state from mailing absentee ballot applications and stop the use of private donations to help administer elections. Election experts say this is going to seriously limit voter turnout, but Secure Michigan Vote doesn't see it that way. Our own Heidi Presbala has been reporting this story out and joins me now. It's so good to see you on set.
It's so great to be here.
Welcome to our new home.
Thank you.
So listen, people know this. You probably see Heidi all the time, our viewers. You're very busy. You are devoting your reporting resources to this story, and we're still a long ways out from the next election, right? Why was this important for you to take your notebook and go and travel and do this piece?
I never left Michigan in my mind.
Okay.
Hallie, I was there during the election.
Yeah.
Michigan was a central theater for President Trump in claiming that the election was stolen. I stood outside the TCF Center as some of his supporters tried to storm it to stop the count. And I knew that this was something that we were going to have to keep a watch on up until the next election. The question really, Hallie, was why did I choose this particular voting rights issue? Because I knew that there was going to be a lot going on there.
Okay.
And there is, including members of his party who are believing and saying that the election was illegitimate, running for the highest office.
Right, which it was not, but right.
Exactly. And claims still that there was fraud, calls for a forensic audit by members of his party who have gone to Mar-a-Lago, come back. We want a forensic audit, just like they had in Arizona. So there's a lot going on there. I just chose this as the first, so more to come.
How did you get in touch with the folks who are organizing this petition, right? Because I know you talked to a guy who's a spokesperson there. Is this just you're sending emails? Are you having to work sources? Were they tough to talk to, or did they want to speak about what they were doing?
Well, they want to speak about what they're doing because they believe, and this is what they told us in the interview, that this will make it more fair. Now, here's the thing. There's not a lot of disclosure going on here, Hallie.
What do you mean by that? Plain English.
Okay, so not a lot of disclosure that there already is a voter ID requirement in Michigan. Okay, you got to show your license in order to vote. However, there is an exception for individuals who may be homeless, who may be underserved. They can sign an affidavit saying, under penalty of perjury, I swear I am this who I say I am. Now, they've never found any evidence that anybody has ever abused that or that there's ever been fraud under that system. And yet, a lot of the people who may be signing this ballot petition may not realize that. That is the concern of county clerks. It's not just Democrats saying that. It's elections officials who I've talked to, Hallie.
Well, what about the Democratic piece of this, right? Because I know you're talking with them as well, and they've pushed this decline to sign effort. They're trying to get people not to sign this petition to try to stop this. Were those people that you had been in contact with already in the course of your reporting, or are you making sort of new contacts as you're going through this?
Look, they told me about this petition and this bubbling up months and months ago, but we and my sources, when we were speaking, never really thought that it would actually come to this, that they would actually do this. And so they told me, they called me when it looked like that this was actually going to happen. Now, it was a little difficult, Hallie, I must say, because a lot of the signing that's going on is not going on out on the street.
You're not door to door. Right.
It's in closed venues. It was very hard to get the Republicans who were organizing this to take me to a location where they're actually doing this out in the open. Now, they said a big part of that is that they are being dogged and followed around by this Decline to Sign campaign. But at the same time, Hallie, it does feel as if a lot of this could be done in closed venues behind closed doors among party activists.
You say more to come. In Michigan, the next story?
Yes.
All right, come back.
Yep.
Tell us about it. Heidi Presbala with our backstory. Thank you so much, Heidi. Appreciate it. Now to a case in Texas over sex trafficking on Facebook that's gone further than any other case like it. After a partial victory in the Texas State Supreme Court, a Houston-based attorney now wants the U.S. Supreme Court to take up this case. And here's the deal. She's arguing tech companies should be held liable for what she believes is the facilitation of sex trafficking of minors. Facebook has to respond to this case by the end of this week. And our Kate Snow talked with her about this case. She's here to preview her reporting for NBC Nightly News. Kate, it's great to see you. Thank you for being on. So talk to us about...
Hallie,
of course. Well, Annie McAdams, tell me about her. Tell me about your conversation.
Right. So Annie McAdams is the lawyer that you just referred to down in Houston. Here's the thing. This all pivots on something you may have heard of, and maybe you don't know what it means because I had to really refresh myself. Section 230.
Yes.
Okay, is a part of the Communications Decency Law of 1996. So this goes back to the creation of the Internet. And for years and years, a lot of courts have found that essentially that piece of the law protects a company like Facebook or any internet platform, really, in that they are not legally responsible for the content that users like you and me post on their website. So Annie McAdams files suit 3 years ago against Facebook, and Facebook says, wait a minute, we're not responsible, under all this precedent, we've never been found responsible for the content of users. On the other hand, Annie McAdams is trying to kind of argue a unique way. She's saying not only is it the content that you're responsible for, but your own actions, Facebook. She argues that Facebook is doing things that help the traffickers. Take a listen.
Facebook knowingly benefits from this sex trafficking that is occurring on their site. They make money off of the connections. They push the connections to occur.
So as Facebook has tried to get this thrown out of court, you mentioned, Hallie, she has won like every step of the way in lower courts, all the way up to the Texas Supreme Court. It was a partial victory. Now she's asking the U.S. Supreme Court to take the case. Facebook, as you might imagine, tells us that tomorrow they're going to be filing to say, no, absolutely not. The Supreme Court doesn't need to weigh in on this.
What else is Facebook saying on that front, Kate? I know that you've reached out. I guess I should say Meta, which is what they are known for now, the big parent corporation, right?
That's right. The parent company, Meta, I can't get used to it either, but they gave us a statement. And look, they take this seriously. They wanted us to know that human trafficking, they say, is abhorrent. It is not allowed on our platforms. We use technology to thwart this kind of abuse, and we encourage people to use the reporting links found across our sites so that our teams of experts can review the content swiftly. They dispute what you just heard Annie McAdams say, Hallie. They say they are not pushing connections. They are using technology to stop grooming. They say they limit how children can be found through searching on Facebook. They remind kids to accept friend requests only from people you know. But I have to tell you, I sat down with a young woman who they're calling Jane Doe. She's at the center of this case. She met someone, she got a friend request when she was 16 years old. And she said to me, when you're 16, you want a lot of friends. And he was a mutual friend of another friend of hers. So she accepted his request. And that's the man that ended up, the story's horrific, Hallie, but ended up taking her to a hotel and trafficking her. In other words, she was, raped again and again. It was awful. So he's criminally in prison now. He's serving 30 years in prison. But this case revolves around her and trying to, again, sue Facebook and trying to get the U.S. Supreme Court to look at this issue, maybe revisit Section 230.
It's such an important topic. I'm so glad you're all over it for us. Kate Snow, thank you. We'll look for more of your reporting tonight on NBC Nightly News. Coming up. Check it out. When wrestling gets real, a man arrested after pretty much body slamming WWE star Seth Rollins during a live broadcast. We're going to show you the moment and more stories coming up in the local. And have you heard about that new role actor Matthew McConaughey may be up for? Governor of Texas. Yeah, for real. He's actually leading in polls ahead of actual politician. So will he actually run? We'll talk about it. Would you eat meat that was grown in a lab? There's some food for thought. Maybe you wouldn't, but our Jake Ward did. So how'd it taste? He's going to fill us in during the original coming up. But first, NBC covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. And this is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. First story is coming out of our New York bureau. A man under arrest for attacking a WWE star during Monday Night Raw at the Barclays Center. Are you looking at this? Police say the guy got out of his seat. He jumped a barricade. He tackled Seth Rollins while he was walking to the stage. Rollins ended up with a swollen lip, but he was fine. He refused a doctor. Also in New York, a Thomas Jefferson statue has been removed from New York City Hall after members of the city council voted to take it down in October because of Jefferson's history as a slaveholder. The statue's new home, the New York Historical Society. And from our LA bureau, get ready for some snubs and maybe some pleasant surprises. The Grammy nominations are out. Jazz musician Jon Batiste hit it big with 11 nominations. And then, Olivia Rodrigo, Justin Bieber, Doja Cat, Billie Eilish, they also got some nominations. But if you're a Swiftie or a BTS stan, you might not be happy. I guess the Academy does not agree with their tens of billions of fans because each of them only got one nomination. Speaking of people who have a lot of fans, Matthew McConaughey. He's won an Oscar. He's a big football fan. He's a pitchman. What about governor of Texas? Seems like plenty of people think that is a great idea. A new poll shows he's got the edge over potential competitors Beto O'Rourke and incumbent Governor Greg Abbott. But here's the thing. Will he or won't he? McConaughey's been toying with that for months. And in a new interview today, he called a potential run for governor a, quote, new embassy of leadership that he's really been doing his diligence to study. Either way, we'll find out soon enough. The deadline to declare the candidacy for Texas governor is just over 2 weeks away. Mark Murray is here to break this down. Listen, he's done a lot of things. Can he be the governor, right? This is the question. And a new poll shows a lot of people want him to. 40% of people in Texas want Matthew McConaughey to run. Listen, some of that might just be celebrity. I know him, name recognition. You know as well as anybody that that matters in polls. But how do you read this?
There is an opening for him in other polls that you end up seeing.
Like a for real opening.
For a celebrity, a different kind of person. You end up looking at Greg Abbott all of a sudden, the Republican governor of Texas. His approval ratings are underwater right now, below 50%. He's facing a Republican primary. Beto O'Rourke, very well-known, big fundraiser on the Democratic side, who is in the race on the Democratic side, but his numbers statewide has very low fave-unfave numbers. And so given those two dynamics, someone like, all right, Matthew McConaughey coming in,
that's not a bad impression,
there is
Mark
a
Murray.
Potential, but the big caveat is, who is he when it comes to politics?
So that's right, because we don't even know if he's a Republican or a Democrat or which party he'd run for, right?
Right. That is the real rub here, because you can be Matthew McConaughey and be all things to all people if people don't know if you're a Republican or Democrat.
That's right.
But all of a sudden you decide to play, I'm on team red, I'm on team blue. Then in our very polarized, tribalized American politics, then people know what you stand for. And all of a sudden that kind of base and that appeal starts to narrow.
So I am sitting here talking to you as a non-celebrity. You are sitting here talking to me, with apologies to you, also as a
But I am a Texan, and I'm a big Texas Longhorn fan, just like Matthew McConaughey.
What is it about celebrities, right? Because we've seen this before. I don't have to name the list of names of people who have kind of crossed over from the world of Hollywood to like our world in Washington here. What is it about political office that celebrities like, and what is it about celebrities that voters sometimes like? Is it that we feel like we know them?
It's all about name ID.
Yeah.
You know, part of politics, the hardest thing is actually to get someone to actually be a well-known person that all of a sudden is like, oh, I know that guy. Here's what he stands for. I'm going to vote for him. And a celebrity, and whether it is someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger or even Donald Trump, comes in, everyone knows that person. And once you declare that I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, that's actually how you get into politics. But Hallie, there's one other thing that, you know, we talk about Jesse Ventura, a wrestling star who became governor of Minnesota as an independent. There's a way to do it, but our politics are so much more nationalized now. You really have to pick a political party rather than going in as the independent route.
And again, we don't know really anything about where McConaughey stands on issues.
Not at all.
Okay. Our resident Texan, Mark Murray. This is your beat for the next 2 weeks. We'll have you back.
Maybe
I can't
longer.
wait. Mark Murray, thank you so much. Appreciate you being with us. We've got other news to bring you now, too. It's some breaking news from that courtroom in Waukesha we talked about at the top of the show. And it is some difficult news to share, because prosecutors are saying in court that they've learned that a sixth person was killed in Sunday's car parade attack. I want to go back to Maura Barrett and Waukesha. And Maura, that hearing that we talked about is over. And this sixth death is a very difficult one. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, Hallie, in court today, they laid out the 5 counts of intentional homicide, and now the prosecutor is saying a 6th count of intentional homicide will be coming because the 6th person has died. We're hearing that it was an 8-year-old boy that unfortunately passed away. His younger brother is also recovering from injuries. We got an update from their church via our affiliate. And so this is obviously a very troubling and sad update, but what we should talk about in terms of the charges, just because the first 5 charges were announced today, that means that the district attorney does have the ability to continually add on more charges if needed until the arraignment date. That's expected to take place in a couple of weeks. We don't have a firm date set on that yet. And as for the other point that we talked about at the top of the show around bail, bail was set for Darrell Brooks at $5 million because of his past criminal history, his violent history, and other items that they brought up that we've been talking about, reporting on the past couple of days in terms of the 10 different crimes that he's been arrested for over the past 20 years. Obviously, someone that they are very concerned about being back in public. So that $5 million bail and a 6th person dead. We also obviously earlier this hour learned that there are 62 people injured, up about a dozen more people than we've been reporting the past couple of days. Hallie.
Maura Barrett and Waukesha. Maura, thank you for coming back on with that developing news tonight. I appreciate it. We're going to have a whole lot more coming coming up right after the break, including tonight's original. We are back with today's original, a store you will only see here. And listen, I'm sure you've heard about this one, right? A lot of demand for Thanksgiving turkey this year, which means your holiday dinner is probably costing you more. Turkey prices are up 14% from last year for a 10-person dinner. And that 10-person dinner costs on average, or the turkey rather, $53.31, $53.31. But here's something you probably haven't heard about. Could be the answer to those increased food costs, to environmental impact. And that is meat grown in a lab. Sure, Hallie, you're thinking that could be an answer, but nobody's actually doing that. We beg to differ. One company is doing exactly that because they think cultivated meat, which is what they call it, is going to be better for the environment and better for the demand around the world. And let's be clear here. This is not vegan meat. This is not like soy or wheat protein or something. This is meat grown in a lab. Jake Ward explains.
This year, the center of the holiday table, be it a Thanksgiving turkey or a Christmas ham, is going to cost more. The short-term cause, supply chain issues. The long-term, our demand for meat is outpacing production. The United Nations estimates that global meat consumption will go up by 14% in the next decade alone. And scientists say we may not have the land or the water to raise meat for everyone.
And that's why this could be the ranch of the future. It's a company called Upside that can grow vast amounts of meat from a tiny thimbleful of real animal cells. I would think coming in here that this is fake meat, but you take exception to that.
100%. And I completely understand why you said it, because a product like this has never been on the market before. And as humans, we have always said meat is equal to a slaughtered animal.
Uma Valetti was a cardiologist trying to regrow heart tissue for patients with cardiac trouble when he realized the same technique could grow all sorts of meat. He found investors, and this lab in Emeryville, California, is the result.
So what is wrong with chicken and poultry as we eat it now off a farm?
The great thing about it is everybody loves it, right? But we don't have space to grow that many animals. And to grow that many animals, you need to be putting them in intensely difficult conditions to grow. And that creates the risk of things like pandemics or zoonotic diseases or, health concerns.
And lab-grown meat is, well, a lot faster.
It takes 2 years for a cow to be raised and go to slaughter as a young beef cattle, about a year for a pig and 3 months for a chicken. We can grow meat in 2 weeks to be able to say cows, chickens, pigs, ducks, turkeys, fish, they can all be grown in a 2-week period.
And to do that, they use the greatest hits of the protein.
There's so many possibilities of what we can do, right? Because you're picking the best quality cells for the taste that you're looking for, and you're putting them together and growing only those cells. So the options are unlimited.
But for cultivated meat to make a dent in the global market, first, they have to convince carnivores everywhere that this really is meat.
We don't expect everybody to fall in love with it right away. But I think there is just enough people that'll fall in love with it to start giving it a foothold in the universe of food.
They'll also need federal approval, which is still pending, and the same inspection process all meat undergoes. I signed a waiver for eating something experimental, and the company brought out its food scientists to make me some chicken. Once it hit the pan, it caramelized like chicken does. It smelled like chicken does.
I see you with your fancy sauces, but I'm going to try and get just at the chicken here. Oh, wow. So you can taste the Maillard reaction. You can taste the burnt sugars of the outside. Yeah, sure. It's quite tender for what's supposed to be sort of a chicken breast. Yeah, and that base note of the after effect, yeah. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know if I bought this in the store and didn't read the fine print. I would totally just go, oh, yeah, that thing had feathers once.
Jake Ward, NBC News.
In other words, Jake, tastes like chicken. Our thanks to Jake Ward for that one. We've heard a lot about social media, right, causing anxiety, causing depression in teens. But now researchers have found evidence that suggests apps like TikTok and Instagram can leave even those of us who are a little older Those of us creeping into middle-aged feeling kind of down. The study was just released today in the medical journal JAMA. Health reporter Erica Edwards is here to talk about this. Erica, I'm so glad you're being here. Thank you. I'm so glad for you being here, I should say, because I think this is of interest to a lot of people in that sort of older than Gen Z category. And to be clear, this research does not prove social media causes depression. We want to be very transparent about that. Break it down for us.
Hey, Hallie, good afternoon. So, right, in general, the study found that people who reported more use of Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram had more feelings of depression over the past year than people who did not use social media sites. Now, to your point, exactly, it does not prove that social media causes depression. What it might do is give us some more insight into what's going on behind closed doors, what's going on behind our screens, especially as we become more isolated over the past year. In fact, it might mean that people who were already more prone to depression in the first place turned to social media to fill a void that ultimately social media could not fill.
And are they talking about depression or sadness, right? Because that's two different things, like feeling a little down versus feeling, getting to the point where you're medically and clinically depressed.
Yeah, these were not doctors' diagnoses. Okay. So these were simply people reporting how they were feeling over the past year.
Why was TikTok such a trigger for this middle-aged group here?
It's interesting because TikTok is a highly visual medium. And it might be that, as we're scrolling through these images without a lot of context behind them, it could do something differently in our brains. I mean, we have to remember, this is essentially people's, highlight reels, their sizzle reels. They're putting their best lives forward that might not always be based in reality.
And that's so interesting because as a TikTok user myself, I also wonder if some of it is sort of seeing the next generation and knowing that I don't know, I'm speculating here, but that you're not up with the latest Duolingo TikTok or whatever it might be, whatever joke or in thing is happening on the app there,
My grandmother once told me that, Erica, I might look like I'm 85 on the outside, but on the inside, I'm always going to be 18. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. As even if our brains are more mature than a 13-year-old's, these social media sites, the feelings, we've all had the feelings of FOMO as I'm scrolling through Instagram. They're still going to affect us no matter what our age is.
But so what's the solution here, right? And that's such a huge question. And I don't mean it to be unanswerable, but do experts say getting off social media, obviously that would probably help, but it's also not necessarily feasible or realistic for a lot of people.
That's exactly right. We are not going to stop using social media. This is here to stay, especially when it comes to our kids and the next generations to come. It's only going to be increasingly important and impactful in their lives. I mean, really, the bottom line is kind of simple. Really be mindful of how much time you're spending on social media. If an hour has gone by, then that might be a little too much. And also be mindful of how you're feeling. If you're scrolling through and you're becoming increasingly agitated, it's time to log off, take a step back, get back to reality.
Listen, it's such good advice. I have to say, if my phone hadn't died last night, I would have been on TikTok till 4 a.m. It's the only reason I went to bed. So I hear you, and I take that to heart. Erica, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate you. Appreciate all of you for joining us. We'll be back here same time, same place tomorrow. See you then.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.